I had first seen him at a National Speakers Association meeting, which was a meeting amongst peers. And I figured if a guy can present and get other peers who get paid to do this to come to their feet and give him a standing applause, he's got to be something special. And Al Walker is that special.
Great speakers last night, and got Famous Amos today at lunch. Y'all need to know something about Famous Amos. He wouldn't be so famous if I hadn't eaten all them cookies. Could have had yogurt.
I've got to thinking also, as I prepared for this, about the impact Margaret has had on my life in the past 5.5 years. I'm a better speaker today and a better person, I think, because of her. And I also realized there were 5 other women who have literally helped make me the man I am today. Dolly Madison, Sarah Lee, Mrs. Fields, Little Debbie, and Aunt Jemima.
I have lost 204 pounds in the past 4 years. Well, thank you. Thank you. I built a career on going up to 455 pounds over about the past umpteen years, and I weighed 251 pounds here just the other day when I last jumped up on the scale. And one thing that's come about as a result of that over the past, particularly the past year and a half, 2 years, where it's really started to show. You know, somebody who's 455 pounds, you got to lose a lot of weight before people start to even notice that. It's kind of like, it's kind of like coming in here and dragging one chair out of this room and hoping somebody's going to notice that. And, it's just, it ain't going to happen. So you got to empty half the room before they start to pay attention.
Back several years ago in 1990, I remember going on a program administered by hospitals called the OptiFast program. I don't know if any of you remember that or not. It consisted of 5 packs of powder a day for 13 weeks. That's all you got to eat. That was it. And I told them when I started, I'm going to do exactly what you tell me to do. I'm not going to veer off this diet one iota. And I didn't. I didn't even participate in the Lord's Supper at church. I made sure I stuck right to the program and for 13 weeks. And in 13 weeks, I lost 102 pounds. I mean, it just came right off. Next 13 weeks on nothing but water and a little bit of Breyer's ice cream, gained back like 110. I mean, it just came right back on. One of the things that people ask me is, why do you call yourself a motivational humorist? Well, the reason is because if they laugh, I'm a humorist. If they don't, then I'm just a motivational speaker. But I believe in both of those. I think messages need to be not only inspiring and motivational, for lack of a better term, but they also need to have a lot of humor, because people remember those humorous stories, and I think we can get a message across on the wings of humor. One of the interesting experiences I had, I have to fly a lot because of what I do, and I started it several years ago just automatically. When I got on a plane, the first flight attendant I saw, I'd say, I'm sitting in seat so-and-so, when you get a chance, bring me a cup of coffee, Coke maybe, and a seatbelt extender, because I needed about that much more to be comfortable. Now, I could get some of them fastened, but it was painful. And I don't like pain any more than anybody else does, so I'd ask for these extenders. And one day I was sitting on a plane, had this extender on, minding my own business, reading the paper, and the plane's loading. And these people are getting on, I'm not paying much attention to them, and a couple got on the plane, sat in the 2 seats directly across the aisle from me. Still hadn't paid them any attention yet, but it didn't take the woman long to get my attention because she was so loud. And her poor husband, I remember his name was Roland, and the reason I remember it so vividly is she must have said it 10 times in like 3 minutes. Rolling this, rolling that, rolling. Anyway, I did what you would have done. I glanced over, and old Roland was a big old boy about my size. He had one end of his seatbelt, and she had the other, and they trying to get this thing hooked up, and it's just not working. She had the old boy about spinning in his seat. She's going, here, Roland, turn this way, Roland, turn that way. And Roland, suck it in. Old Roland's trying to suck it in. And it's just not coming together. And I'm about to lean across the aisle and tell them about these extenders, which they were obviously, they weren't aware of. But before I had a chance to say anything, old Roland looks my way, says to his wife, I guess he thought I was deaf, because as close as I was to him, but he says to his wife, well, if he can get his on, I ought to be able to get mine. Well, all sympathy ceased for Roland at that point, and I decided it was time to have a little fun with the old boy, and because I only needed that much, I had a good foot and a half of that extender left over kind of hanging down in my lap. And I waited to just the right moment. When I knew he was looking my way, I reached down, kept reading my paper, reached down, picked up my extra belt and threw it over the arm of the chair so he'd see it. And you could have heard his head snap when he saw I had extra belt. And just the devil got loose in me or something, I don't know. But just to add to this, I reached down and picked it up and twirled it a time or two for added effect. And unbeknownst to me, the flight attendant had been watching every bit of this. And she came over and leaned down across me and set that cup of coffee down or whatever it was, and she whispered to me so Roland couldn't hear. She said, "You want to let's tell him about these extenders? Or do you just want him to bust at about 30,000 feet?" And I looked over, and they had gotten Roland's seatbelt fastened, but you couldn't see it. It was up in there somewhere. That thing just totally disappeared. And old Roland had a death grip on his arm of that chair, and veins stuck out. And I said, "Let him bust. We'll clean him up later." Anyway, that's
We affectionately refer to this as the seatbelt story, which is a great example of how Al shares real-life experiences to illustrate any one of several points to reinforce the theme or objectives of your meeting. All of us know that things don't always go as smoothly as we'd like. Listen to a recent client of Al's describe how Al handles adversity in the field.
We love Al. He's truly a professional. I've been here 15 years, and we've used him several times in my tenure here. He just adapts marvelously to whatever the situation. He knows the group, and he takes time to understand what the issues are. So when you want him to hit a point home, he does a very good job of getting the background information and making sure that he truly understands it instead of just being a talking head talking to our group. Makes it very personal and obviously delivers it in a very humorous way. He does adapt marvelously. We had a recent January convention, and it was a speaker and a meeting planner's nightmare. From everything that could go wrong did go wrong. We went from a in-room meeting situation to having to be outside with a lot of distractions like beautiful weather and waterside. And during the presentation, in comes a cruise ship, and we had a thrill boat ride come up and pick up some people who were going on a tour, and Al just rolled right through the punches and included some of his funny lines with the humor of the distraction. So highly recommend Al, and he really is just a delight to work with.
One of my good buddies is a guy named Jim Rozier, who's a county administrator down near Charleston, South Carolina, Berkeley County. And Jim heard me speak one time at a governor's rural economic conference in my state a few years ago, and he said he had just had two things happen to him that week that really illustrated ignorant and stupid. Real quick, here they are. He said ignorant. Had a lady come into his office, mad as she could be, veins stuck out, wagging her finger. Said you almost had fire coming out of her eyes almost. And he said she as I heard her talk, what I learned was she was saying, "I don't know what's going on around here. We've been paying our water bill for over 40 years, and somebody has decided to cut the hot water off to our house. I want that hot water cut back on. I need my hot water." And Jim said he realized he had a lady standing in front of him who honestly, sincerely thought there were two water lines going to her house. One hot, one cold. He said, "I tried to explain to her, ma'am, there's one water line. When it gets there, you can do with it whatever you want. You can heat it up, cool it, we don't care." But he said, I really couldn't convince her. He said, he had a meeting to go to, so he said, "I tell you what, I got a meeting to go to. If you'll go on home, I'll get somebody to come fix you a hot water line." And so she left, seemed to be satisfied, called a plumber friend of his, said, "Miss So-and-so was just in here. How about go fix her hot water heater, whatever's wrong with it. By the way, get your money because the county's not going to pay for that." And so Jim said he had that conversation, hung the phone up, and went to his meeting. Later on that afternoon, phone rang. It was a plumber. He was kind of chuckling. He said, "I went out to Miss So-and-so's house, and she really did not know about hot water heaters. One of the few humans on the planet that had never been exposed to that. Her husband had passed away a couple of months earlier, and he had handled every bit of it and had just never told her, never showed it to her. She never heard it in a conversation, which amazes me, but Jim swears that's the truth." And he said the plumber said when he showed her that hot water heater and explained to her how it worked, she was so embarrassed over the way she'd acted in your office, this is the plumber talking now, acted in your office this morning, she asked me to call for her and apologize to you for her being so stupid. And Jim said, "Well, she wasn't stupid, she was just ignorant. If she didn't know, she didn't know. And that's what being ignorant is all about. We don't know something, we learn it, now we know that, now we move on to something else. He said, but let me tell you about stupid. Had a lady call, just a few days earlier, and said, Mr. Rozier, I need for you to come out here to our house and put up one of those deer crossing signs. He said, ma'am, we don't do that. That's the Department of Natural Resources. They know where the deer cross the road for food and for shelter and water and all that sort of stuff. And she said, that's the problem out here. These deer out here where I live are just crossing this road wherever they want to. They crossing at one end of the road, and they crossing up at the other end of the road, and they crossing through the yard, and we need a sign so the deer will know where to cross the road. And Jim said, I don't know what to tell her. I said, ma'am, I don't know how to tell you this, but you know the deer can't read. And said that she said very indignantly, why, of course I know the deer can't read. That's why y'all put that picture of that jumping deer up there on that.
He's got a lineage here of success that is unprecedented. He shared the podium with people like Ronald Reagan, Art Linkletter, Zig Ziglar. He's been with the best of the best. He's in the National Speakers Association Hall of Fame. He's a winner of the Cavett Award, which is the highest recognized honor amongst professional speakers, only given to one individual every year, and it's really a who's who of the great motivators and people that can inspire others to great things.
Back in 1990, I had the privilege of being in Atlanta, Georgia, at the Marriott Marquis Hotel with a gentleman and a few other speaker friends of mine, but one person in particular, I'm sure you'll recognize the name, Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. He's been dead now for about 11 years, but Dr. Peale was quite an imposing figure, even though he also was not a very big guy, a little fella. And we were in a meeting there with about 25 or 30 speakers who'd been around for a while, and Mike Frank, who was the speaker and a bureau owner from Columbus, Ohio, was on a stool, and Dr. Peale was on a stool, and the rest of us were kind of on a horseshoe-shaped table, and he was kind of interviewing, just talking to Dr. Peale. At the time, Dr. Peale was 92 years old. He was born in 1898, and we'd always add just 2 years to whatever the year was. That's how old Dr. Peale was. So in 1990, he was a 92-year-old little guy, and Mike says, what's kept you going? And he was very energetic at 92. I mean, he was still speaking all over the world, traveling, doing all that stuff with his wife, Ruth. And Mike says, what in the world's kept you so energized? What's kept you going? Because the rest of these people would like to know that so we could do it too. And Dr. Peale at 92, I would have thought he might have said, well, let me think about that a minute. But boy, he didn't. He didn't miss a beat. He said, there are two things that have kept me going. It kind of caught us all up short a little bit for him to respond so quickly. The first one didn't surprise me, though. Those of you who are familiar with his name and know that he started Guidepost magazine and probably wrote 20 books at least, was also a pastor. He was pastor at Barber Collegiate Church in New York City, so he talked about his faith and how important that was in his life and how he depended every day on that, and actually gave a little sermon almost for about 10 to 15 minutes there to everybody that was in the room. And finally, when he got through, Mike said, all right, what's the second thing that's kept you going? And I really thought he was going to say something about diet or about exercise like so many of them do, but he didn't. The second one's the one that really caught me off guard. He kind of smiled and he said, I've never lost my curiosity. I was 43 years old. I'm 58 now. That was 15 years ago. I had never consciously at that point in my life sat on the edge of my bed and said, when I woke up one morning, said, you pretty well got a handle on life. You know what you're doing, your education's in place, your experience is pretty good, you've done some other things you need to do to get where you are, so you can kind of coast now. I'd never consciously done that, and none of you have either. I don't believe anybody is even halfway responsible would ever have that kind of a thought. But what begins to happen, particularly those who have been in a profession for a long time, after a while we start to get a little relaxed and we don't push ourselves quite as hard as we once did to get where we are. And I had let that happen to me. So I made a recommitment, I guess, to Al Walker and his personal growth and development then. And since then I've been doing two things. One, I'm back to, have been for 15 years now, I'm a voracious reader again. I'm still reading a good bit, but not as much as I had been earlier, and I've gotten back to that, and I read constantly. I keep several books going. That's probably because of that ADD I'm sure I would have had if I'd known what it was. But the second thing is that I made a commitment to me to do something, to go to some school or some program every year. That may be a fly fishing school. It may be to go learn how to do something else we do better. I don't know what it is, but I've been to every year, though. I do something. It could be something we do at go up to Billy Graham or go to that Gaither thing like we've done before. And for a weekend to just expose ourselves to some things that are different. And I believe that's what keeps me at a higher level of curiosity now, because of just those two things. I want to challenge you. I think people who think big and live large see themselves as being ignorant. By that I mean they never feel like they have all the answers.
Through the many years we have arranged for Al Walker to speak for our clients, we've never known one who did not come back to us and thank us profusely for the way Al delivered his message, spread the warmth of his spirit, and left everyone thankful they came to the meeting. Al Walker has earned the right to be in the Speakers Hall of Fame. He's found a way to communicate the heart of the matter with indelibly good humor and professionalism. We're glad to recommend him.
Al Walker is a tremendous motivational speaker. My teachers do not get an opportunity to laugh, and I knew if anybody could, Al Walker could get my teachers to laugh, and that's exactly what he did.
There's a poem I use in some talks called Persistence, and it's about that topic, which we know is important in sales. But I have a little booklet that's from that. I had a cartoonist draw little pictures that go along with it, about 8 or 10 pages. I had one with me. Went to lunch with this group. I had just spoken to them that morning with one of the executives in the association. He said, "Do you happen to have a copy of the poem?" I said, "Yes." Had one, gave it to him. Left, went on home. 3 years later, I'm at my desk reading the mail. An envelope opens, out pops his copy of that poem. Dog-eared, looked like he'd been run over by a truck, ink stains, coffee stains, crumpled up, half-torn pages. I mean, it was a mess. I'm looking at that thing, and I start reading the letter. And the letter starts off, "Dear Al, you'll never know the profound impact you had on our lives that day in Virginia." Now, let me stop there. How many of y'all got up this morning thinking you can go somewhere and have a profound impact on anybody? That thought never crossed my mind either. That's not how I live my life. Most of us don't go through life thinking that way. We just do the best we can, hoping that somebody can take that and do something with it. And so I didn't, that caught me up a little short. And I kept on reading, and she went on to tell me how her husband's lungs had basically turned to granite over the past couple of years, and how he had carried that poem with him every day of his life, and had last 3 years of his life been probably the best years of his life, because he tried to live by some of those things I had shared with him that day in Virginia. And she said this poem meant so much to him. Of course, by the time I get down to that point, near the end of this letter, my eyes are watered up, and I'm starting to really feel this whole deal here. And she asked, she said, we have 4 children, so would you send a copy of that poem for each of our children? I think they'd love to have a copy of the same poem their dad carried with him the last 3 years of his life. I'd have sent her a case if she'd asked for them, but I sent her 4 or 5, and I actually sent the one she sent me back. My father had just passed away 6 months earlier, and I said, I tell you what, I know everything my dad had is important to me. I'll bet you one of your kids would love to have this poem their daddy carried with him. And so if they don't, I'd be honored to have it, but ask one of them first. The reason I share that with you is this. I keep that letter. I have that letter to this day. And it's in my system, matter of fact, up in my room right now in this hotel. That happened a few years ago. I read that letter every once in a while just to remind me that if I never touch another human's life, one day in Virginia, I had an impact on one person. I made a difference in their life. In addition to everything else we do, if you aren't making a life difference, a difference in someone else's life, somewhere, why are you here on the planet? I think that's the biggest job we all have in addition to all this other stuff. And I promise you, those people who go through life doing that, matter of fact, you got somebody in Phoenix right now. I talked to Stacy, by the way, told him about that Project Hope thing that you involved with, the Helping Feed Hungry People. I'm on the board at Harvest Hope in Columbia that does the same kind of thing in about 18 counties. But if you aren't making a difference, I wonder why you're here. Y'all have been wonderful. Thank you for laughing at my crazy old stories. And I hope that something I've said here could have some benefit to you personally. Thank you for having me.